In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in Black and White emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our...
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of America in Black and White, where we are coloring conversations on America's canvas. Tonight, we have a very special guest. We've got Mr. Lafayette Brown III with us. Lafayette is a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Louisville, Kentucky. He also works as general caregiver support program coordinator at the Robley Rex VAMC, that's the VA Medical Center, responsible for providing case management, psychoeducation, and supportive groups for caregivers of veterans enrolled in a program for general supportive services, or PGCSS. Mr. Brown is a member of the Outreach Task Force, Town Hall Sessions, Outreach Force Representative PGCSS, and the Caregiver Support Program as Director for monthly Community Town Hall Sessions and collaborations on other community partnerships. Prior to his role, he served in the role of social worker case manager for the post 9/11 Military 2VA, M2VA Case Management Program and the Substance Use Disorder Specialist and the Homeless Veteran Program. He provided in-home SUD therapy as well as education and training for community partners serving the veteran homeless population. Mr. Brown is the chair of the Trauma-Informed Care Committee at Robley Rex VAMC and is a trauma-informed care leader who provides educational presentations and trainings both for internally for VA employees and community partners. Mr. Brown is currently a doctoral student at the University of Louisville, Raymond A. Kent School of Social Work and Family Science. He is also a therapist in private practice at Season of Sanctuary, SOS LLC. He specializes in trauma, anxiety, substance abuse, couples therapy, men issues, and transitional issues. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you all to Mr. Lafayette Brown. Hello, sir.
Hello, everyone.
How are you?
I'm good, Charles. There's a lot of letters and a lot of acronyms in my daily job, so I appreciate the fact that you stuck with it. It can be difficult.
Well, I apologize because I actually was going through it like I kept getting caught up or something. I'm not sure exactly what was happening.
They put up it's a lot of jargon, I think. So, just to say that I work with caregivers, providing care with veterans on my day job, and in private practice, I work with community members, families, just trying to be a helping force in this world. So I wish I could have just gave you that one sentence, but these bios have to be so long. So
I understand. No, it's all good. But is there anything you'd like to add to that before we get into the show?
The only thing I like to add is today I'm here speaking on from a private practice standpoint. In our current climate, I want to make sure that we know that all my words are my words and not the words of my day job. So this is me speaking as a private practice clinician about the issues that we are going to discuss tonight.
Okay. And I definitely appreciate that. So as we go into this, can you start out by telling us what inspired you to become a mental health counselor?
Wow. So you're taking me all the way back to my time when I was in the military. I think I came to the military like most people do. I was trying to find my way. So I thought I would go and be a man. But what I didn't realize at that time, and I know now that I'm 47, is that being a man is more than just doing. It's about being a healthiest version of yourself. And so I met a social worker while I was in the military. Went there to speak with them for some counseling, and I was blown away by their empathy and the way that this person was able to kind of connect with me on a deep level in such a short period of time. And I didn't know what they did or how they got there, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. And back in my life, I've experienced a lot of times when people will come to me and tell me things, not that I'm requesting to know what's going on with your life, but maybe people felt that comfort that I felt with that social worker. And so after bouncing around from trying to be an accountant to all these jobs where I can make money, I realized that, my role is to help people. And the more people I help, all that other stuff is money and career, all those things will work themselves out.
Wow, that's interesting. So when it comes down to your work, though, I
Mhm.
mean, is it one of those things where you have to kind of like control the situation where you don't want to have to do too much empathy and sympathy, or is that all a part of what goes into that work?
One of the things I drew from just the core tenets of being a social worker is meeting someone where they're at. So I think my job as a substance use disorder specialist did it best. When I met with those veterans who were recently housed, a lot of times they were in active addiction. So active addiction means that they're actively struggling with whatever substance it is that they're struggling with. And so I would go into the homes, and I realized then that um, being able to help them, being able to meet them at that point, allowed them the latitude to trust me. Now, I'm not someone coming in from the outside. So, though I may know some things that can help you, I'm not the expert on your life. And so, just being able to meet someone where they're at and walk at the speed they're willing to walk, I think is really, really important. And so, another thing that I learned from that social worker was they didn't try to extract everything and this is what you need to do. They kind of led me along that path and asked me what did I want to do, and then kind of walk through those decisions with me. So it's really walking alongside someone is how I think about it. And then, of course, there are clinical things that I have to assess for suicidality, whether you want to harm someone else, whether there's abuse or neglect. But outside of that, my main role is to meet you as a human and try to help you get to a better place.
Wow. Oh man, that's a lot of work, and I can just imagine how detailed they get, especially when you have a client that's probably really, really out there on the limb, and you got to pull them back in.
There are times when people are struggling with crisis. And so crisis is usually the most intensive work I've done. And I've done a little bit of that in an emergency psychiatric setting in the hospital, and also just as in my daily job when we do suicide assessments and stuff like that. We have to bring some humanity to some of these things. They're such taboo topics. But what we're dealing with is a human who's having a difficult experience. And sometimes the experience is so difficult that they can only think of one way to stop that experience. And so, you really have to take a step back and realize that what is the goal here? I may be the clinical professional, but this person needs to be seen. They need to be heard. And if I don't do nothing else, I just want to validate that your experience is real, um, because it's your experience.
Hmm. Wow. So as we're talking about you in private practice, tell us when it comes to your clients and your that you see, how do you define mental health, and why do you think it's often overlooked in our society?
So it's difficult to kind of wrap that up into a single sentence. I'll say it this way. I think each day we get a chance to make a choice. And I think there are days when people harp on the choices that they made that brought them to today. And they lose sight of the fact that today is still another chance. Now is still another chance to make a decision that could change tomorrow, when we kind of get stuck in the past. And so a lot of my clients suffer with things like
Mhm.
anxiety or major depressive disorder. Um, and it's usually around some past event that can't be changed that's outside of their locus of control. And so when you kind of reach someone at that point, you really got to kind of just stand in the storm with them. And that storm can be different for each client. Some people come in just need what I would call like a tune-up. They just need to talk with someone, talk through some things. They have some coping skills. They can get through the difficult times. Other clients need a total tear down and rebuild of how they kind of see the world. But it's not my job to tear it down for them. So I really just want to help them say, hey, here's something there's a backhoe or some sort of equipment that you use. I'm not in construction. I'm sorry. But, we could use these things, and then we look at the constructs that they have of their lives, or the different thought patterns or the cognitions, how they see the world. And I just ask the question, is that useful for you now? Because when we're in survival, what's useful for me to survive won't always be useful for me to thrive, if that makes sense.
Oh, wow. Yeah, but that makes a whole lot of sense, and what I'm just thinking about is like, like let me just give an example, and you just kind of help me out here. So let's say like when you've got this client that's coming to see you, I'm not going to say they're so bad off, but let's just say, there may be some substance abuse, but then there's also just some social issues as to just dealing and coping with society and time. And when you have that kind of client that comes to you, what is normally your approach to how do you start with processing that client to building them out, up, however that goes, to making things a little bit better for them?
Well, I think the first step is getting a successful diagnostic evaluation and making sure that we understand how they're seeing the world, or some sort of diagnosis. So whether it's major depression, or whether it's major depression, there could be a single episode. It could be moderate, right? A single episode that's moderate, or a single episode that's mild or reoccurring. So really got to figure out what their story is. So a lot of the first part of it is paperwork heavy. Of course, I send you a lot of assessments and stuff, but those assessments are tools that I use to kind of judge, to get a snapshot in time of where you're at now, based on how you've seen your past up until today. And so that's where I would always start. And so once I kind of get an idea of, okay, this person deals with anxiety, stress, or frustration, maybe there's some powerlessness around some trauma that happened, and so that trauma is reoccurring. Like, it really depends on how all those pieces are kind of laid out. And then generally, once we kind of figure out what we got going on, I kind of start with what's most prevalent to them. Because you could have major depression, but be dealing with the fact that you better be kicked out of your house. So then, I need to get you the resources so that now you can feel safe, and now you can feel like you can kind of begin to take on some of these larger issues. And so that's how I would generally start the process. And then we would come up with some goals. Those goals would be, let's say you had social anxiety and you didn't want to be in a crowd of people. I get with a lot. I deal with that a lot working with veterans. And so one of the things may be just once or twice a week, you go to a public place. It doesn't have to be a place where there's thousands of people, but maybe you go to like a restaurant where there's a couple tens of people, right? And stay as long as you can, come back. So that's kind of exposure therapy, exposing you to this thing. That's a form of intervention. But depends on what they're going through. Interventions can be a wide range. One of my favorites is cognitive behavioral therapy. This idea of what I think leads to how I feel, leads to how I act. So I don't think I have any value. I may feel like no one cares about me. So how may I act? I may act in ways that are detrimental to my health and my overall well-being. And if you track that all the way back, it comes back from this thought. So, and then there's motivational interviewing. So sometimes I don't do intervention. I just kind of walk with you. I kind of ask Socratic questioning. How is it helping you? How do you see that decision going forward? I may do some modeling. So if you want to have a conversation, that's a difficult conversation with a loved one, I may say, well, say it how you would say it to loved one to me. And then we will walk through that. So it really kind of depends on where that person's at, but there are a lot of different tools, more than what I've mentioned, that we can use to kind of meet them where they're at and get them to where they want to go.
Okay. So, in your counseling career, can you tell us what actually shaped your thought processes as in going through the field that got you to this point of wanting to, go out and be an entrepreneur?
So for me, when I was going to school, my undergraduate is in human service and counseling. So I got a counseling undergraduate and I went ahead for my master's in social work. That uniquely prepared me for therapy because I learned a lot about the modalities. And one of the ones I learned about that was really interesting to me was reality therapy. And so it's really kind of looking at this idea of locus of control and what we can't control, we should control. And we should be able to recognize the things that are outside of our control. A lot of how I am, like you said, kind of leads back to my experience in life. The way that I've kind of been brought up to kind of deal with things as a Black male is that, you kind of suck it up, you drive on, you just deal with it. And that can be, again, a survival technique. But can you survive with that for 40, 50, 60, 70 years of your life? At some point, you have to kind of get into this place of safety where you can begin to grow and thrive. And so I've always taken this angle that I really want to help people feel safe, because I think a lot of things in our world don't feel safe now. And so it's a difficulty to have this sense of community, right? We're United States of America, but how united are we? But yet that's the moniker that we kind of have to the world. And so a lot of times people just feel lost. We are as connected as we have ever been technologically wise, and as distant as we ever been emotionally and interpersonally. And so for me, in my experience as a Black man growing up, I've always wanted to kind of help people not kind of have the experiences that I've had. And those have been both along racial lines or just along the lines of me trying to understand how the world sees me, knowing who I am, which is usually for most of us different than how the world sees us. So you almost have to kind of wear like this suit showing that you're safe. And so imagine that walking through your life trying to make people feel safe when you may not feel safe yourself. So a lot of times that psychological safety is one of the things I really, really key on, because if I don't feel safe, I can't talk to you. If I can't talk to you, you can't help me.
Oh, wow. Now, see, that's interesting. So, especially when it comes to the counseling itself, like, if you don't mind, just tell us, like, what would that look like? They say coming from that perspective.
Oh.
Yeah, what would that look like?
So the first thing is to try to help people realize what their strengths are. So it's really, for me, a strengths-based approach, right? A lot of times we think about, like, I don't have this, I don't have money, I don't have a job, I don't have a home, I don't have a car. Well, what do you have? Has there been a time? So if someone said that, so I would ask questions like, well, what do you have? Has there ever been a time where you experienced something difficult and you got through it? Oh yeah, well, there was this one time where X and Y happened and I did A, B, and C. So there is a history of you being resilient, right? So I'm really using their own experience, using their own words to disprove the negative or cognitive distortions that they're having. So that's kind of what it looks like. It's kind of a dance. I don't never disagree with what they're saying, but I always want to know, how does it serve you now? You know what I mean? And if it's not serving you in the way, like, again, a survival technique, then it's not good. And so that could take, I can't tell you how long it could take, because it really depends on the individual. Some people feel safe soon. Some people have to get everything out and see how you respond to it. They have an expectation that you might judge them, which there's no judgment in therapy. But still, I can understand pouring yourself out in front of someone, being vulnerable. When I don't know that vulnerability is something that we celebrate in our society.
So, what are some of the common misconceptions about mental health counseling that you encounter?
I would say that it's not affordable, or that it's difficult to get into. I will say there are some barriers if you aren't technologically advanced. Like, a lot of things are going to websites and online, and there are some still in persons. So as the world shifts, I think our ability to provide care in the ways we provide care shift too. So that can be a barrier for certain populations. I don't want to triangulate like a certain one, but whoever has problems with that. Other misconceptions is, I still hear this idea of don't shrink. I don't want to be shrunk. Well, what do you mean by shrunk? Don't So there's this concept that you're going to come in and I'm going to, with my words, kind of play with your mind and change the way you think. And that's not at all my objective. Um, Sometimes I think most difficult things I think we avoid. It's difficult for us to kind of, and so if someone's kind of pointing at that, saying, hey, well, what about this thing over here? I guess that can feel like I'm trying to change the way you think. But the truth of the matter is that coping skills, whether they are healthy for us or maladaptive, we utilize them to survive our daily day experiences. And so the biggest thing I want people to understand, if they're thinking about mental health, or if they're considering it, is that if you find the right person, it can be a great journey. But still, just like anything else, you have to find the right person you feel comfortable with opening up to. And once you get that connection, then I think there can be growth beyond that, because I can feel safe enough to say, hey, CK, this happened. And you, knowing you won't judge me. And then what you're saying to me, you're saying from an authentic and empathetic heart. And so a lot of it is modeling. We have to kind of be stewards of the stuff that we talk about, as well as taking care of ourselves. So I hope that if there's any therapists out there, I hope you have a therapist. I have a therapist. I need someone to talk to at times. And so, yes, that's one of the misconceptions too, that therapists don't get therapy. I think we do. I think we all need to talk to someone. I think at the base, we all need to be heard. And so for me,
Right.
I think that's one of the biggest one is the shrink part and the don't mess with my mind. I think I've heard that almost every time I've gotten a client.
And so how do you approach building trust with your clients?
That is a very interesting question. So I'm going to answer it as if I was talking to a client. There are 3 R's that I think about when I'm going to say something. Is it the right time to say it? Is it the right way to say it? And am I saying it in the right way? Am I saying it right time, right thing, and in the right intention? Right. So I set my intention to try to be as empathetic or receptive as possible. And that's the basis of what I can do. So I'm hopeful that when I present to people, I seem approachable. But I realize that people come with their own past experiences. And so my face may not be a face that you may have thought of as a place of safety before. So you have to almost accept the things you can't change, right? And ask questions. I always ask these Socratic questions. I'm always trying to do motivational interviewing. I'm always trying to see what is your motivation to do this and do that. And I never press anyone into therapy. So I do offer a 15-minute consultation. I can talk to you for 15 minutes and never talk to you again. But if that's what if it's not the time for you, that's okay. That's self-determination. You get to go out there and walk the path until life becomes so untenable that something has to change. And usually that's what drives people. So as long as I set my intention, I think that works best for me. And then I'm definitely not the professional. You are of your life. You are the expert on your life. Whoever you are listening. If you go talk with someone, they don't know your experience. They've lived theirs. But they are trying to take a chance and trying to understand you. And so I usually try to say those things, and they land how they land depending on how people feel about it.
So can you discuss the importance of culturally competent care in mental health?
I think it is important to understand where someone comes from and how they see the world. I don't know that we give a lot of credence to the fact that me being here in Kentucky and you being there in Atlanta, that even that distance can have 2 different perspectives on the world. And so whether you are Black or you're white or you're Latino or you're some other nationality or ethnicity, we can't know everything about every culture, but it is important that you try to understand, because things like direct eye contact can be disrespected in some cultures. Talking to the wife as opposed to talking to the husband first can be disrespected in some cultures. And so we run the risk, if we don't try to at least be culturally competent, we run the risk of traumatizing or even hurting someone and preventing them from even going to therapy again if we don't handle the interaction as we should. So assessments tell you a lot of that. They tell you where this person comes from, what kind of background they have. If it's something you don't know, I do think that as a social worker in mental health, we are always learning. We got to get our CEUs every 3 years and pay for our license. And so cultural competency is one of those things that is that we have to kind of re-up every so often to keep our minds on the population and what they're going through so we can have a view of that.
So, so in your practice, what role does self-care play for you as a counselor?
See, Charles, you're asking the tough questions. I will be honest with you and your audience. I will preface this by saying that self-care is very important for each and every one of us. And with that being said, self-care is still something that I strive to perfect every day. You know, I can only speak from my perspective. So as a Black man with a job and a private practice and coaching my kids, and there are a lot of different responsibilities that I have. And there have been times when I've foregone eating or taking care of myself just to take care of others. I am aware of that, you know, but I still have my times where I let it get so bad that I may get sick or something. So it's not that I have somehow mastered this and now I can teach the masses. No, it's something I continually struggle with, but it's key. It's vital. So what do I do when I get a chance to do it? I do some meditations. I got a shed out back, so I'll go out there where it's quiet. There's no one but me, and I'll listen to some jazz. Jazz can be meditation for me. I do some affirmations sometimes. I just find different ways to kind of feed my mind something that's reinforcing for me. Because a lot of stuff we feed our minds is not really good for us, right? And then we have this technology that keeps our mind working all the time. So another thing I try to do is I try to detach. My family might not like that, but I love my family. I answer my phone, but when I need my time, I don't answer my phone. And so it's okay because I think we should all have healthy boundaries. So I can engage in the world or with others at my level to the extent that I can. And then those of us who are for us should understand that.
How do you stay informed about the latest developments in mental health practices?
Okay. So then that goes back to this education, right? So there are a lot of different CEUs that you can learn. If you think about a doctor, right? You go to the emergency room, it's emergency room doctor. But even from there, you can get referred or get a consult to a specialist. So an orthopedic specialist or a podiatrist or something like that. So if we look at mental health, there are a lot of different interventions that you can go into. You can go into family systems where you deal with only working with group families. You can go into cognitive behavioral therapy. You can go into where you're dealing with their thoughts and feelings and behavior. This is what I specialize in. You can do trauma as well. Some of these things are kind of interchangeable. But it's like trauma-informed care, as I've learned that, I've realized that it incorporates a lot of the things that I've been doing before. And so for me, I kind of pick the things that kind of resonate with me, and I try to read up on those. Of course, I'm in school, so there's no shortage of research articles and papers to write. But outside of school, you know, social work journals, you know, there are different places where you can buy CEUs that offer different training. So it's really, the onus is on us to be lifetime learners. And then we're, of course, motivated by renewing our licenses. And so why not learn about something that you want to learn about, right? And utilize that in your practice. And that's kind of how I use my, I think it's 30 CEUs I got to get every 3 years. I always try to find something interesting. And then my job offers a lot of those as well. So, you know, if it's something that I don't know about, I would love to learn about it. One of the things is they got cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So now we're thinking about what we think and what we feel and how we act and how it relates to us and our inability to sleep. And so that's just, even that cognitive behavior now has another slice to it, right? And so really, just like doctors, we try to specialize. We find what works for us, and then we kind of master it over time.
Ooh, okay, I might need to take that course about the insomnia. I might need to learn.
It is available. It is available at your mental health provider. I think you're a veteran, right? So you can get that. You have to
so what are your thoughts on the impact of social media on mental health?
I think that social media has had a very, very negative effect on our mental health. Um, there are a couple examples that kind of come to mind. Um, this idea of so instant gratification is when we want something, we get it immediately, so we get that dopamine hit. And so if we do that all the time, which is what our phone does, give me this, search for that, I want to see this, I want to see that, I want likes, like all these different things give us instant gratification, dopamine hits, feel good, I feel good, or I feel accomplished, however you want to describe it, the different ways people describe what dopamine does. So you imagine that always getting that instant hit all the time, whatever you want, whatever you want, whatever you want. And then you have to go through a process of completing a bachelor's degree or going to get a master's degree. This doesn't happen instantly. This happens over time. And so I think that instant gratification and that constant ding shortens our attention span, right? That's one of the things that's kind of happen. We don't have the span to really invest in people. And so listen to them really. Right? If it doesn't happen in 5 or 10 seconds, like a reel or something you watch, or 20, 30 seconds, like you kind of drift off. And so by decreasing these things that have allowed us untethered information, unfeathered access to information, have also they've not made us or forced us to do the work to kind of get that. So if you know, like I know back in the day, you used to have the Dewey Decimal System to look up a book. You can just type it in. So you can type it in the computer. Bam, here's the book, and the book comes to your computer, right? Yeah. And so I think there's a skill set that comes with that level of adversity, if you want to think about it, based on our the easiest technology has given us day to day. But it was something that kind of we had to build, and we had to kind of grow, and we had to kind of be able to incubate that ability to be resilient. And so, yeah, this now instant gratification, I think, is one of the things I struggle with, because I have 2 young sons and I'm trying to navigate them saying, listen, all of this is nice, but sometimes you got to put a little more work in before it comes out, right? Like planting a seed. You can't plant it today in water and it pops out the ground tomorrow.
If you could change one thing about mental health services in America, what would it be?
I think it's too complicated to access. I think insurances are ridiculous, and they're always moving the post, and sometimes, the rates change, and there's all this, like when I was doing my own billing personally before I switched over to my new electronic record, it was a mess. I talked to you for an hour, I'd bill, and if something was wrong or something wasn't right, like you almost got to be an expert on the business side and the mental health side. And as I was telling you, just keeping up with being like we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be current, right? And anything that's going on, modalities and stuff, keeping up with that, and doing the business side, dealing with insurances when they change the rates. Maybe we can't do telehealth no more for this one, but we can do telehealth for this one. Applying to get credentialed for insurances is a nightmare. So just that whole process of getting into business for therapists, I think would be nice if it was streamlined. I wasn't taught that in school, so the whole process I learned by paying for a presentation. They kind of walked me through. But we're not instilling that in therapists. We're not giving them the business part of it. It's great to be able to speak with people, but we have to be able to kind of know how to put ourselves in a position to help the most people, to cast the widest net. Of course, that's in business and business practices. So I think getting insurance and the cost of it for clients is ridiculous, because if you don't have insurance, and you're trying to private pay, I think people deserve the rates that they charge because they're professionals. But it really kind of creates these haves and have-nots as far as I have insurance, so then I have access, right, to care, right?
So let's transition over to your trauma training, because I think that that in itself, I know that that's got to have some real serious impact on people in general. And I guess so we can also learn as to how you do this, and what's the, maybe some methods and so forth. How did you transition into trauma training, and what motivated that move?
So at the time when I was at the transition, I'm 2018, 2019, I just started my day job. I met someone else there. So I'm doing substance abuse. A lot of times substance abuse can be a symptom of a deeper problem, more than likely a trauma. And so what is this? What is a substance abuse? This substance abuse is a maladaptive, not unhealthy way of coping with it. So they're kind of numbing, right? And so I was having a conversation. She was a social worker. She is a social worker as well. And she said, that's really weird, because trauma can do a lot. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so she kind of introduced me to the concept of trauma-informed care and raising people's awareness about the prevalence of trauma. There was a study done by Kaiser Permanente. And this was a couple years ago, not a couple years ago. I think it was 2012. It's in my presentation. I should remember this, but it's a little nuance. But it's been around for such a long time. And what they found is that 64% of people, that's 2 out of 3 people, have had at least one ACE. What is an ACE? An ACE is an adverse childhood experience. So your parents getting divorced, having someone in your family who went to jail, having someone in your family who suffers from mental health, any sort of physical or sexual abuse in childhood. All of these are considered ACEs. So what does that mean? Well, as your ACE score goes up, I got a divorce, mental health in my family, and somebody went to jail, or I seen my mother abused. As your ACE scores go up, they found in this study that your propensity for negative health outcomes increased. The most shocking one for me was anyone with a score of 6. Now it's not in law, but it's just saying that the probability is higher the more ACEs you have. But yeah, I mean, you get 4 or 5 ACEs on average, those people live 20 years shorter than most people with less ACEs.
Oh, wow. So would that be because of all of those added stresses and pressures are just taken away not only from the lifespan itself, but it's just causing irrational, irregular behaviors that just get out of hand?
100%. So let's say that I had ACEs. So childhood should be built on this, again, my favorite word, safety. This experience of a child feeling safe. If a child cries and a parent is there to respond, then the child feels safe. But if a child cries and no one responds, there's the possibility or the probability that as that goes on, that child starts to have some sort of attachment disorder where, they don't feel safe with this parent. So if we think about it that way, as we kind of develop, if we get those healthy experiences in our lives, then we get healthy neural development where our brain develops as healthy as it should. We have healthy social interactions. We learn all these different ways of engaging life in a healthy way. But if we don't, if our pyramid is built on adverse childhood experiences, well, then we have maladaptive attachment disorder. We don't develop. And I can't remember a study off the top of my head, but there are some studies that say that it affects neural development. So now your brain doesn't develop the way it's supposed to, which can cause you to have some sort of social or emotional, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. Then once you have this social and emotional disturbance, say you have no way of dealing with that, then you find ways to kind of cope with that. And a lot of times it can lead to substances, not only substances, but like behaviors that would be destructive. Like, let's say that someone, I don't want to say everyone would be promiscuous, but what if that's the way that I dealt with my pain was I went out.
It's like a coping mechanism.
That's how I cope. Until I do that, I can't, I'm stressed. Stressed, I want to do that. Some people get stressed and want to smoke. I think they call it za now or whatever it is. So, weed. Some people want to drink. Some people may shop. Right? All these different things are ways of we're trying to make ourselves feel good. Dopamine, right? And then once we get the dopamine rush, if it's attached to some sort of unhealthy way of dealing with it, then it becomes problematic. I might just get buzzed and feel good a couple of times the first couple of drinks. But if I use that same coping mechanism every single day over an extended period of time, it becomes detrimental to me. And then it becomes an addiction where I can't let go of it, right? So that's what we're talking about. Like, any child, regardless of ethnicity, what are those experiences? So people say nature versus nurture. So um, nurture is who's there to raise you. Then nature is what you're born with, right? So you could be born with a propensity or a genetically disposition to have a certain condition, but there could be some nurturing. Your parents were there. There were supports in place where these things don't manifest as badly as they would. Take a child with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
With a parent who is supportive, who understands, they go to counseling, they get into medicine, they do all these different things to support that child. That child learns a way to deal with the world healthier than they would if they didn't have that support. The parent had no idea. The schools are taking over, and I'm not to blame anything on the schools, but we're trying to help the child regulate, and where they kind of should get that base, they're not. And then a lot of times that base is built on traumatic experiences, and then so on and so forth, which can lead to diseases if you're out there, all kinds of different negative kind of things you can think about because we are not dealing with our problems in a healthy way. And so that's what it's built on. If you think about building a childhood on something safe, then we can see the propensity for that child to have a good life and not have to deal with these things to the level that someone would who has a higher ACE score.
Now, as deep as that is, because that, I mean, that's eye popping.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you this: if you know the answer to this, that would be wonderful. How does what you was just discussing?
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate, or how have you seen that relate to the underserved, marginalized urban communities?
I'm glad you asked that. So ACEs that come out, but since that they've come out with this ACEs, they're trying to make one that is specifically for individuals who experience lower income or health disparities or low socioeconomic status. And so they didn't have a code. They haven't named it yet, but what they're saying is the way that kind of interacts is that those disparities, systemic racism, or those socioeconomic factors, were often they're disproportionately affected by poverty or limited education opportunities or a lack of access to healthcare, like I was saying before. All those things make a difference when you're growing up. Household dysfunction, again, it talks to the ACEs. Was it parental separation? Was there mental illness? Was there substance abuse? Right? All those kids have a higher risk. And it does contribute to higher risk in ACEs for Black children. So 61% of Black non-Hispanic children have experienced at least one ACE. And that's compared to 40% of white non-Hispanic children. So what we're looking at is the underserved communities, Black, brown, or otherwise, often don't have those protective factors in place that other well-served communities do. So just imagine if we're talking about systemic racism, right, or some sort of history of discrimination, it kind of creates a context where Black communities are likely more often to experience various forms of adversity, right, such as discrimination or violence, or again, lack of access to resources. So compare that to a child who may be white, non-Hispanic, or not in that, or not experiencing that racism. They don't have that perspective of reality. And so it's almost like we're walking in the same world, but we're seeing, or the world's seeing us differently. And so we are seeing and engaging with the world differently. And so it definitely affects those because there is a higher prevalence that Black individuals have higher rates of ACEs compared to white individuals. And while there hasn't been any studies that I've found, they may be out there about, if we're talking about our brown community, as far as Mexicans or Latino, I'm pretty sure that if we're looking at the same kind of engagement with the society as a whole, the likelihood that those numbers would be the same.
Mm. Wow. Ooh, that's really deep. And also, that basically, and I hope I'm not saying this wrong, but that kind of like leads credence to, as into the why,
Mm,
and so it's like you have so many different people from what looks to be so many different areas, but
mhm,
it seems like there's like, to some extent, there's this commonality of that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that they have. And it's kind of like, how could that be for, if they're like in so many different places, but it's the same?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't think locality or where we're located precludes us from experiencing any of these things. I would say that sometimes a locality might put us at higher risk, depending on where we're at and what the social norms are, because we have those norms as a nation. But there are regional norms and things that happen in regions that don't happen in other regions. And so based upon that, yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. I think that when we think about trauma, and I've said this a lot of times, we think about this big T trauma. So I had a buddy die in Vietnam, not Vietnam, but at war, or I was sexually abused, or these things that are really, 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 we think are really, really terrible. But I think what we lose sight of is it's not my job to determine if Charles' trauma was qualified to be a trauma. So the experience, the example I give in my classes is, I never used to always look in my rearview mirror when I stopped at a stoplight until I was stopped at a stoplight and a truck slammed into the back of my car.
Ooh.
Now I didn't get hurt, but I do remember vividly looking in my mirror and seeing the lights, and they just didn't stop. So for me, it's not comparable to these bigger traumas. But in my experience, before that happened, I didn't. After that happened, I do it regularly. Does it disrupt my life? Maybe in that moment, because I always have that thought in my head. Now you imagine something larger happening, how that could be disruptive to a person and their lifestyle when they feel like, oh my God, here we go again. And that is automatic. Your body says, this feels like that time somebody ran into the back of me. If a car's coming up fast and they stop, and I breathe, my heart, all of these things happen. So imagine then if you went in a home where the parents were yelling and screaming and it was just dysfunction. Whenever you get into or be around the dysfunction, you'll feel that again. And so a lot of those things are kind of ingrained on our kind of memory as kids. And so we have to go back and dig back and look at those things.
So what are some key elements of effective trauma training in diverse communities?
Key elements of effective trauma training in diverse communities. The first element is to understand the prevalence of trauma. And then we need to understand that the 3 E's of trauma. There is the event, right? If we can understand the event, and then we can understand that person's experience, right, of that event, right? Because it really only matters how I experience. And that's what I was trying to say to you before. Like, if depending on the trauma, it's the person who decides whether that's traumatic or not. And then the effect, like what the effect did it have on you, right? And that's where we get to was this something that kind of lasts? How does that work against diverse communities? Well, I think we all have different experiences. If we look at a similar thing like life in America and everyone's experience, we would find that those 3 E's would be very different for each and every one of us. And so that kind of connects that cultural competence piece with knowing that the prevalence of certain things in a community, right? It doesn't mean that when I talk to you as a Black man, you had X, Y, and Z going on. But I understand the prevalence of systemic racism, how systems have affected you and everyone that's been in your family. Now I can at least connect with what you're saying, right? I can't see or even have a concept of the way you see the world. I can't help you. And so the importance of that cultural diversity, being able to speak to people, because, some things aren't traumas in some cultures. So you definitely got to just understand that the prevalence that is there, and then understanding how trauma works. And those are the 2 that I would kind of go with. There are some others as far as going into details of trauma-informed care. But if I was to start with someone who knew nothing, I just want you to know that those 3 E's, that there are events that people experience that have a lifelong effect on them. And that's what trauma is.
So I guess we kind of like tapped into this in just now, but can you explain how trauma affects individuals differently across cultural lines?
So I think we have to look at cultural norms for each ethnic group, right? Ethnicity, I should say. Some things are norm for us. Some experiences are norm that aren't normal in others. So I grew up in the west end of Louisville, which is kind of a tough place to live. That experience of growing up in the west end of Louisville might look different for me if I were a white male, or if I were a Mexican male, or if I was any other ethnicity as far as male. Because my experience would be from that perspective. So it was a mostly Black community. So if I was a different ethnicity group, then it would be, you'd be almost kind of find a way in, right? So
Yes,
you have to continually learn what are the cultural do's and don'ts. If you know those, then you can know how trauma affects them. If you have someone or culture where they don't talk about when it gets hard, you just do what you're supposed to do, it has to be done, well, then we can't talk to them about certain things, because they won't see the value in me talking about how the pressure of you having to work at a young age could have made you feel anxiety, right, to succeed or something, like, or whatever, as far as an example. They won't understand it because in their culture, this is what we do. So we got to understand that even our culture, we normalize a lot of things that are unhealthy, right? The other people may look at us and say, why do they do that? Well, this is just what we do. So that's how trauma can be effective, because sometimes our cultural norms can disqualify something as a trauma, even if individually I feel traumatized by it. It had a dramatic effect on my life. The larger diaspora is saying that, well, that's not trauma. And again, it goes back to what I'm saying. How can you judge what's traumatic for the next individual because you don't live life in their perspective?
In your experience, what are the most common types of trauma that people face today?
I've run into a lot of people who've had comorbidities, where they had a mental health diagnosis and a substance abuse diagnosis. And what I've found is that maybe more so now, because I'm not a young person, so I'm not connected to everything, but maybe more so now, therapy may be more open. But for a population of people, and I'm going to say for Black males, I don't know if we feel comfortable enough still going to someone and being vulnerable, when I think that it's difficult every day, no matter where you're at. I don't care if you got on a suit and tie, or if you're hanging on the block. Like, there are still norms that kind of affect all of us. And so for that population, I think that I've seen that the few that kind of engage is that they're kind of weary to walk into the waters, but they do notice something needs to be done. So I think there is an awakening saying, hey, I need to do something about how I am experiencing life. And so my hope is that I have 2 in my career now. I'm hopeful that more come on, not just to me, but to anyone, because we have to change the way that we perceive our experience in order to get a handle on what we need to do. So you got to name it to tame it. So that's what I would tell anybody. If you can't name what's going on with you, you can't tame it.
I think that's sound advice, because as you were just speaking of, I think when you say how like in certain cultures, how they make things normal that aren't really normal, for especially for the majority of the mass. And I think that in itself is kind of wrapped up into, it sounds like it's wrapped up into a lot of things. It sounds like the one thing that they're relying on most is how they cope.
Yeah.
And I think so if that's the case, then I think that's what's going to continue to make up this large area of trauma that you speak of with the 3 E's.
Mm. 100%, 100%. Listen, if I'm honest with you, and I want to be honest with you, I kind of feel like a lot of the violence that we kind of sell re-traumatizes us as a people, and the things that we kind of see, we buy them and we make them mainstream, but they are really, really things that kind of cut us to the core. And so if we normalize that, right? If a culture normalizes that, it's very difficult for someone to engage in trauma when they feel like they're going against the very core of who they are, right? So if men are supposed to be strong and I talk about their feelings in the culture, ain't no way I'm gonna come talk to you about how I'm feeling. I'll just deal with it, right? A lot of times they get there because the people around them realize this person isn't functioning at a high level, or they're doing something that's affecting the family unit. And so their partner or their wife or someone would kind of reach out to me. I've just had that happen. And so I would say that I would like for everyone to consider each other's experience. That sounds like pie in the sky, but that's basically for me what trauma-informed care is. I am talking to you assuming that you may have had a trauma. So in doing so and in taking that stance, I try not to be re-traumatizing to you as best I can. I can't control everything. Triggers can be sights or smells or sounds. I can't control all your triggers. But realizing that people have gone through something, that's what we can do for each other.
All right.
Today, you don't have to be a therapist. Hey, how can I help you?
How do you tailor your training programs to meet the specific needs of different ethnic groups?
Okay. So I have a general, for now, I have a general just basic trauma. And we talk about trauma-informed care and we raise awareness and we kind of talk about that. I have not specified it to general populations as far as ethnicities, but I have changed it for different professions. So I've done one for nursing. I've done one for social work. I've done one for caregiver. I would like to, and I've been working on a presentation. I did do one on Black males and with a coworker of mine, and she did one about Black females experience. And so I did talk about trauma as far as that and the different type of outcomes that Black men have. But I haven't ventured any further than that. I haven't had those opportunities. I look forward to those, being able to kind of learn more about the other cultures, more than what I know now in presenting those presentations. Because like we said, I have to consider those cultural competencies when I'm talking about this is trauma. And so it is a growth. Like I said, I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm growing with you guys. So if you didn't know nothing about trauma, now you do. And so now with that information, what are you going to do with it? When you see someone in distress. And that's my call. That's my call to arms for each and every one of us. The biggest statement that trauma-informed care has is when we look at someone, as opposed to saying, what happened to you, CK? I'm so opposed to what's wrong with you, CK? I'm asking, what happened to you?
Right.
Yeah. Not what's wrong with you, because I think that our behaviors get us what we need. So if I needed attention, I needed some help and I couldn't get it, and I went somewhere and I acted a fool and people responded, then what do you think I would do next time I needed some help? People don't listen to my voice, but when I act a fool,
yes,
something happens.
Yeah.
And so we just need to realize that that's a behavior that's trying to get a need met, and not a person that's just trying to be a certain way. And that's a little bit of a switch.
So what are the most significant barriers you see in addressing trauma in various communities?
That cultural piece, that idea of, is that really a trauma? Like you'll be okay, right? And we've done it a lot. I've come from the Army talks about suck it up and drive on. Like it's this idea of keep on pushing, keep going.